Right now, it's just a wasteland. It's tires everywhere, and now we need to correct it before it does additional damage.
Did you know every year, an amazing 18 billion pounds of trash made of plastic ends up in our seas? To give you an idea of how much trash that is, it would cover the whole shore of the world 5 times over. Our seas have become like a time bomb that is about to go off because of all the pollution. In comparison, something very unusual was done off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in the United States, in the 1970s. In a way that not many people know about, 2 million used car tires were thrown right on the reef. This was carried out to help protect the reef that was there. It's not what you might think, but this project wasn't meant to hurt sea life. They meant to help it, though. What you find might surprise you. Stay tuned to find out the interesting story of how 2 million tires ended up at the bottom of the ocean. Before you read the rest of the story about the tires, there are some very important facts you need to know. These facts are both important and, dare I say it, scary. Before 1972, there weren't many rules that stopped companies from disposing of almost anything they wanted in the oceans. It was pretty much open season. In 1968 alone, about 38 million tons of excavated materials, 4.5 million tons of industrial trash, and another 4.5 million tons of sewage were dumped without any respect. There were 100 million tons of plastic, 2 to 4 tons of chemical garbage, and a terrifying 1 million tons of heavy metals in this. Unfortunately, these numbers are just considered guesses. There isn't much written about that time, so it's hard to know how bad the damage really was. For those of you who think that's scary, get ready for this. Records from the U.S. Archives show that between 1946 and 1970, an amazing 55,000 containers of radioactive trash made their way into the Pacific Ocean. Also, between 1951 and 1962, an extra 34,000 tons were dumped at 3 sites off the East Coast. This is a worrisome picture of careless environmental behavior. Through a series of bad decisions, we've basically done a huge amount of damage to the water in our world. Even though these acts are clearly horrifying, it's important to put them in the context of their time. In contrast to the 1950s, people today have a much better knowledge of how harmful and dangerous substances are to the environment. The hippie movement in the 1960s, on the other hand, caused a big change in American culture. People have become much more aware of environmental problems. Because of this, by 1972, the government had taken big steps to fix the problem by limiting what could be dumped into the ocean. Good job. Businesses that made a lot of waste had to look for other ways to deal with the mess they made. This is where the story of the tires starts. When the American auto industry was growing quickly in the 1970s, it made an amazing 170 million tires every year, which made trash management very difficult. Even though simple recycling methods were around as early as the 1960s, most tires ended up in dumps or were burned. But in 1972, Broward Artificial Reef Incorporated came up with a bold plan to deal with 2 important problems at the same time: the growing pile of unsightly tires on land and the damage that was still being done to the ocean. What was their plan? Using the extra tires to build a fake reef off the coast of Fort Lauderdale. Yes, natural coral reefs are very important to the ecosystems of our seas. As marine invertebrates, corals provide food and shelter for a wide range of aquatic life. It would be terrible if these reefs went away, but unfortunately, we are seeing that happen. This means that the goal of throwing tires into the ocean was to give new corals more space to grow. Corals that are healthy bring more fish to the area, which is good for the marine environment. Bada bing bada boom? In fact, that's everything you need for an environment to keep going on its own. Yes, it may sound too good to be true, but similar man-made reefs have been successfully built in the Gulf of Mexico, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and Africa, as well as the northeastern United States. So why not try it out in Florida? Oh, hold tight. This story isn't as simple as it seems. The project got government approval in 1974, and that spring, more than 100 privately owned boats offered to take part. Each ship took thousands of tires that were held together with steel clips and nylon and spread them out over an 88-acre area, 7,000 feet out to sea. The project got so much backing that even Goodyear, a company that makes tires, joined in. They did more than just give tools to smaller boats. They also left their mark on the project by christening the site, by dropping a huge, gold-plated tire from a branded blimp as it flew overhead. Wow! In fact, quite the show. Who knew that dropping tires could be such a big deal? 2 million tires, just think of the scene. Imagine a huge wave of tires falling off of ships and into the Atlantic Ocean, which is enormous. The show is so strange that it makes no sense. I'd say something a little like this. Now, 50 years later, the scene is almost unrecognizable from how it looked at first. Where are all the fish and corals? They're not to be found, though. The Osborne Artificial Reef was a terrible failure, despite the high dreams and big promises of big results at the start. Remember how I said earlier that the tire packages were held together with nylon and steel clips? Sure thing. Oh, it looks like no one thought to treat the steel to keep it from rusting. You see, most metals, including steel, rust when they come into contact with water. Because steel is mostly iron, it goes through a process where water takes electrons away from the iron atoms. This makes hydrated iron oxide, which is what we all know as rust. When there is salt water around, this rusting process goes 5 times faster than when there is fresh water around. Because of the electrolytes that are in salt water, which conduct electricity better than fresh water, things rust more quickly in seawater. Since rusting is mostly about moving electrons around, the metal breaks down faster when these electrons are taken away. In the end, putting steel that hasn't been cleaned in the ocean is a huge mistake. This is a strong word for me. Soon after the tires were put down, the steel that held them together started to break apart. This made all 2 million tires free and able to move around. There are times when the weather in Florida is especially bad. Every year, storms shook up the water, creating currents below the surface that pushed the loose tires into the natural reef that was already there. Because of this, everything on the reef was fully destroyed. The tires weren't helping to grow a new reef. They were accidentally damaging the one that was already there. It wasn't just the local environment that was affected by this damage, though. Oh no. Hurricane Opal hit the Gulf Coast in 1995 and caused a lot of damage. It threw over 1,000 tires all over the Florida Panhandle. After that, Hurricane Bonnie in 1998 made things even worse by leaving thousands more tires on the beaches of North Carolina. What a mess it was, to say the least. There's more, though. The saying, "A rolling stone gathers no moss," comes to mind. The same is true for moving tires. Corals don't like them either. The tires not only destroyed the reef that was already there, but they also did a terrible job of encouraging new growth. To grow well, corals need clean, warm seas full of colorful animals. Those conditions aren't exactly present when a tire is thrown 900 miles to North Carolina, is it? But before we give up hope, there is a glimmer of hope. Osborne Reef may not be completely lost after all. Nova Southeastern University teachers got a $30,000 grant in 2001 to start a project to clean up the reef. With this money, they were able to organize dives to go deep into the water and get 1,600 of the loose tires. Actually, it's not a huge haul in the big picture, but hey, it's a start. Prior to this process, it looked like nobody paid any attention to the mess down there for 30 years. With all the appropriate permits in hand and a boat, crew, and divers hired, it cost about $17 for each of the 1,600 tires to be taken off. That's a pretty steep price. In fact, it was thought that cleaning up the whole reef would cost between an unbelievable $40 million and $100 million. Oh no. It's easy to see why progress stopped, but in 2007, the military decided to use the area around the reef as a real-life training ground, which gave the cleanup effort a new boost. About 10,000 tires were brought ashore during military practice that one year. The Florida government gave this effort an extra boost by setting aside $2 million to help pay for transporting and getting rid of the tires once they got to land. It's impressive that 72,000 tires have been recovered by 2009, when hundreds of thousands of dollars more had been put into the project. Unfortunately, after military activities in the area ended, more than 95% of the tires were still there, representing a huge problem that still needs to be solved. But I said it wasn't all bad, right? Thanks to an extra $4.3 million deal with the Industrial Divers Corporation, a lot of progress was finally made on the site between 2016 and 2019. At their busiest, the IDC was bringing out between 2,000 and 5,000 tires a week, for a total of 250,000 tires. Even though they made a lot of progress, about 2/3 of the tires were still on the ocean floor, continuing to cost the Florida government a lot of money. That is until a better, cheaper option came along. In 2021, a new business called 4Ocean entered the market. They said they were going to recover tires from a 34-acre area north of the original drop site. They planned to pay for some of this by selling bands made from recycled tires for $29 each. 4Ocean's website says that for every bracelet sold, they will remove 5 pounds of trash from the water. What a great goal. That's cool. Plus, they've made a lot of progress. According to estimates made in 2022, there are still about 500,000 tires left, which is only 25% of the total number that needed to be taken away. Wow, that's really cool. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Remember how I told you earlier that Nova Southeastern University paid about $17 per tire for the initial cleanup? Anyway, I did some rough math here, and while they're not always correct, let's look at this. A car tire weighs about 25 pounds on average. It's crazy that one $29 band helps get rid of 5 pounds of trash, which brings the total cost of getting rid of one tire to an unbelievable $145. That is 8.5 times what the first cleanup job cost, which is crazy. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about a few things before everyone starts to freak out. To begin, it's important to remember that the first cleanup was 20 years ago, and prices for almost everything have gone up since then. Additionally, it's important to remember that 4Ocean is not a charity. It is clearly a business that exists to make money. Because of this, they'll have to pay for a lot of boring business costs that the university teachers wouldn't have had to deal with. A rise of 8.5 times really makes you think, doesn't it? There's no doubt that 4Ocean is making big steps toward cleaning up the mess, but it's also hard to ignore the big bucks they're making along the way. This is where things get tricky. Can we fairly judge businesses that make money and do good things for the earth? Or am I just taking the attention off of the real problem? What happened? Why weren't the people who made this mess responsible for cleaning it up? Do you remember Goodyear? The company that made the tires was more than happy to give away free tools to help get rid of all those tires. Does anyone remember the big deal they made when they dropped a huge gold tire into the mix? Now, though, they seem to have simply forgotten about the whole mess. As I look from here, it looks like they were more than happy to throw all of their Goodyear tires into the ocean instead of a dump. Not only do landfills look bad, but they're also bad for your reputation. But unlike a big moving island that everyone can see, the Osborne Reef doesn't get in the way of swimming or blocking anyone's view. The damage is hidden below the surface, where no one can see or think about it. But none of those things are what really worries me. Listen to me. There's a good chance, a pretty good chance, that the people who made the mess will realize how much money they can make by fixing the problems they caused. If they haven't already, they might figure out ways to make money by getting rid of their own trash. By that point, we are in a system that unintentionally encourages pollution because the benefits of fixing it are so appealing. Now, I'm not saying that 4Ocean is using these kinds of methods. I really think they mean well. But I'm also not ruling out the chance that something like that could happen, which is definitely scary. This is really tough. Unfortunately, Osborne Reef wasn't the only tire reef idea that didn't work out. In the 1980s, a similar mess happened in France. Between Cannes and Antibes, on the French Riviera, Authorities sunk about 25,000 tires about 1,600 feet from the shore. Again, they thought the tires would stay still and not hurt the natural environment. But in 2005, experts made a shocking find. The tires had been putting chemicals and heavy metals into the water all along. Even though these elements are necessary for ecosystems to work, too much of them can stop animals from growing or, in the worst cases, kill them. Thankfully, quick and firm action was taken, and most of the tires were taken away as part of a cleanup effort led by the French government and the tire company Michelin. The whole project cost a little over $1.1 million, which is about $44 per tire. This is a lot less than Four Oceans' project cost. Today, experts from the Ocean Conservancy, an environmental advocacy group, say that there isn't much proof that artificial reefs work, even for the ones that do get noticed. The list of possible problems is long, running from paint and plastic parts that are toxic to ecosystems that are hurt. The most damaging fact, though, is that artificial reefs don't seem to do what they were supposed to do, which was to create new fish populations. In fact, man-made reefs don't help new plants grow. Instead, they bring fish from nearby reefs, which are usually natural, and group them together in one place. Then, fishermen notice that there are a lot of fish in one place, and decide to overfish these species, starting a harmful cycle that keeps going. Experts have expressed concerns and tried to discourage the building of new man-made reefs, but the results have been mixed. Off the coast of Key Biscayne, Florida, there is an interesting man-made building called the Neptune Memorial Reef. It opened to the public in 2007. What is it for? To be a place for some surprisingly strange goods to rest. That's certainly a surprise turn of events. But don't worry, thank goodness, it's not the souls of the damned who rest there. The reef does, however, offer an interesting service. When someone dies, their burned remains are mixed with pH-neutral cement to make sure it doesn't change the water's properties like regular cement would. They use this mixture to make a monument out of concrete. As heavy as 4,000 pounds, these monuments can be anywhere from 550 pounds to 4,000 pounds. Oh my gosh, there is no way those could float away. In fact, each monument was carefully built to stand up to the strongest storms of the last 100 years. That's not all, though. They've also thought about another important thing. The surface of each structure is purposely rough so that corals have a lot of places to connect themselves. Neat! After each memory ornament is carefully made, it is carefully lowered into the huge 600,000 square foot site, where it is carefully placed next to each other. You won't believe it, but this place is set up like a huge underwater city, with roads, a center feature, and even benches and statues that are underwater. Very cool. Marine biologist Gary Levine and artist Kim Brandel came up with the idea for Neptune Memorial Reef. They wanted to create a peaceful place where over 125,000 souls could find endless peace. The famous cook Julia Childs is one of the 1,500 people who have been there since it opened in 2022. Even though it has taken a while, the reef has grown and is now home to over 140 marine species. It has been set aside as a special management zone for boaters, scuba divers, and people showing their respects to loved ones. But fishing boats and lobster divers are not allowed to do anything that could hurt the environment. If you're thinking about getting this peaceful place for yourself or a loved one, wait until you hear how much it costs. The most basic memorial costs a very high $13,000, but that amount can go up to $85,000 based on how complicated the design is. Just so you know, that doesn't cover the cost of burning, which is usually around $3,500 to $7,800. Yikes! Even though the price might be too high for some, this one-of-a-kind memorial doesn't seem to have any problems, does it? They've learned from what went wrong at nearby Osborne Reef and made the required changes. A lot of good things have been said about the reef, but it also has some problems. First, let's talk about burning, which is usually not a good idea. About 900 pounds of harmful carbon dioxide are released into the air for every person who is cremated. This is a major cause of climate change and global warming. But it might not be fair to say that this area is the only place where cremation has hurt the environment. Anyway, people would still choose burning even if this reef wasn't there. But the kind of concrete that is mixed with the ashes is important. Making concrete is responsible for an amazing 8% of all carbon dioxide pollution in the world, which is very bad for the environment. More CO2 dissolves in the seas, lowering the pH level. This makes the water more acidic. Corals need salty water to grow, which is a shame. So, even though the reef uses a special kind of concrete that doesn't release dangerous chemicals into the water, the process of making concrete is still a big worry. That brings me to my last, somewhat sad point. Doesn't this all seem like a bit of a joke? Thinking about living coffins isn't really a new idea. Recently, there have been a lot more eco-friendly ways to bury people, like coffins made from mushroom fibers and seed pots that grow into trees. However, it makes sense to say that these new ideas only scratch the surface of environmentalism and don't really address more basic changes. Well, I won't be around, but feel free to throw me into a salad, is like that. Because the price is so high compared to other burial choices, I think it's a bit snobbish that only rich people can pay the ridiculously high price to turn into a chunk of concrete. In that case, Neptune Reef is doing what it's supposed to do. I'm not sure if there will be a big effect on the environment, though. The same doubts exist about the USS Oriskany, a man-made reef that looks even stranger. It's usual for ships to sink at sea, but the Oriskany didn't do so in battle or by accident. The ship was sunk on purpose. Yes, the ship was put into service in the 1950s and served in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. It was removed in 1976 and was stored for many years without being used. It was towed to different places until, finally, in 2004, the Navy revealed that the ship had been sold to Florida, where it would be turned into an artificial reef. So Florida didn't take the obvious step of taking it apart and using its parts for something else. Instead, they did something very different in 2006. With 500 pounds of C4 explosives, they sailed it 24 miles south of Pensacola and set it off. You really couldn't make up a story like this if you tried. I know it sounds impossible, but the sunk USS Oriskany has been a huge success. The 900-foot-long wreck quickly became a busy place for sea life and is now one of the best places for scuba divers to visit. However, the Oriskany went through a lot of environmental remediation before it was sunk, which is just a fancy word for getting rid of the dangerous materials. Even with all of these attempts, there were still hundreds of pounds of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, which are chemicals that cause cancer, hiding in the wiring and insulation. These items were popular around the time the Oriskany was built, but they were banned in 1978 because they were so dangerous. Also, guess what? They are still on board the ship. Even though it's not clear if this has actually hurt anyone, it looks like a huge mistake. The reef does well, but the possible negative effects may not show up for a while. They might not have been able to show their ugly faces if the ship had been thrown away right away. You could make good points for or against this method, but listen to me out. The Oriskany has a lot of sentimental value because it was used in the war. It would have been a loss of history if it had been thrown away. By sinking it, it can still be seen and appreciated, but only by scuba experts with a lot of training. So, it's possible that sinking the ship was more about honoring memories than about protecting the Earth. Anyway, I think what I'm trying to say is that the Oriskany, like these other islands, seems to try to fix one problem by making a much bigger one worse. Have more extra tires than you need? Throw them into the water. Extra waste concrete? Throw it into the water. Have a huge aircraft carrier in the Navy? You get the idea. Let me think about it. I see what you mean now. It's going into the water. We see the same trend with Osborne, Neptune, and the USS Oriskany. When companies have too much of something that costs a lot to properly get rid of, they use questionable legal tactics to just dump it and move on. If, and it's a big if, the reef works, Everyone is proud of themselves and counts how much money they saved. But if it fails, like it did with Osborne, they've already moved away from the problem. Please let me know if you've been to any of these sites and how they feel about them. Could I convince you to change your mind about how silly everything seems? Have a great time until we meet again.